And welcome everyone to the joint session of the Select Board, School Committee, and the Ad Hoc Advisory Subcommittee. I guess you guys need to come up with a better name. That just doesn't work. Yeah. So I'd like to welcome our new members of the School Committee, Jennifer Monopoli and David Perlman. So the new members have learned that if you're in this room, if you're on this side of the room, that's the less desirable side, because you're too close to the wall. So just a little bit about tonight. We're going to be going through a presentation that was put together by the school staff plus the firm HMFH, who we've hired on to help us with this alternative site study. And leading this effort has been Joe Connolly, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. So Ben Loomis tonight is Joe Connolly. But even though Joe is not here, Joe's fingerprints are all over this thing, and this really is Joe's voice. So Joe's calming and forward-thinking, forward-looking influence is evident throughout. And I thank him, and I think everyone up on the dais should thank him, and everyone in the community should thank him for taking on really, I'm going to call this a thankless task, but hopefully by the end it'll be a thankful task. So,
and Dr. Connolly is going to be back with us for the meetings in June. Right.
So the format of tonight is basically the information. The team is going to be providing information to the boards and to the public, and right after the presentation will go up on the, it's already up on the school's website, and I think the link is right there. And in this report is going to be a lot of information. This is going to be a very dense report, and there's going to be, and we'll be talking about a lot of sites, a lot of options, and the options differ in many ways. And in some ways, it's kind of a daunting task, and one of the things we kind of have to figure out is how do we distill this information and get it into a form that will help us get to a decision. The goal is to get to a decision by the end of June. We have a series of meetings set up after this meeting. The next meeting is June 6th, and the schedule will be up on the screen. So after tonight's meeting, we'll be we have 2 weeks of town meeting where we won't be having any night school meetings, but we'll be taking care of the broader business of the town. And then after town meeting, we'll be picking this up again. So would you like to say something, David?
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Stalwarts, who I see a lot of stalwarts out here who've been a part of this process for a really long time. Those of you who are new, welcome as well. I just want to share something. I took advantage of an opportunity this afternoon to remind myself of why we're all here in this room together, and that was that the Dave O'Hara and Jen Buller, the two principals of Lower Devotion and to be the principals of all of Devotion next year, we're taking the PTO leaders and the site council leaders for Devotion on a tour of the new building, which is not open yet. It's still under construction. And so I tagged along. And And it was really a wonderful experience. It's a fabulous building, and it's going to be a great environment for teaching and learning. And I really enjoyed seeing the building, but what I enjoyed far more were the looks on the faces of the site council and the PTO leaders, and even more of the two principals as they walked through their building. They just couldn't keep the smiles off their face. There was so much excitement and anticipation and wide eyes from the parents who hadn't been in the building before. And we're going to get there. Whatever we choose to do here to build more schools so we can have excellent teaching and learning and joy in our buildings for all of our students and all of our teachers and our administrators and our parents and our staff, we're going to get there. So thanks for being part of this.
Oh, I'll add to that story. 20-something years ago, I was privileged to be at the opening of the new Lincoln School, which is a beautiful building with beautiful architecture in a historic neighborhood with terrible traffic and very narrow streets. And in today's environment, we would hear, oh, you can't put a school on Kennard Road, and you can't put a school on Walnut Street, but it works. It's not, maybe it's not the best at 7:45 in the morning, but people get through there, and it just works. So traffic, yes, it's a concern, and yes, we have to think about it, and yes, we have to figure it out, but we'll figure it out. So with that said, just a little more about tonight's format. Tonight is really the night to obtain information, and during the presentation, I'm going to ask the committees to kind of hold your questions, unless it's a very short question, until the end. If you see something and you just a very, very short question, I see Ben saying, oh, no. I see Pip at HMFH saying, oh, no. The instruction was no questions until the end of the, so understand that they've been yelling at me, no questions, and so please, if you have make sure they're very short questions, and hold the real questions to the end. If you need a little clarification, you ask. And tonight is not a night for public comment. There'll be plenty of time for that starting on June 6th. So tonight is the results of the alternative site study. So with that, I turn it over to Ben Loomis, who's standing in for Joe Connolly. So I look at Ben, and I see Joe Connolly right now. And I'll just, one last thing, I'll remind especially my school committee colleagues, the microphones up here work a little differently up here. In the school committee room, by default, they're off. Up here, by default, they're on. So just remember that.
Thank you, Mr. Wyszynski. I adore Joe, and I have just aged a bit, I feel, but it's okay. So just for those who don't know, I'm in charge of planning and communications for the school district, and I've been the primary district leader working on the night school selection process with Joe Connolly. I'd also like to introduce Pip Lewis. He's a principal at HMFH Architects, who's been our primary partner during the site selection study. Pip and HMFH are also the architects of the Devotion School, which, as Mr. Pollack said, remains on time and on budget. I want to acknowledge a few notable absences tonight. First of all, Superintendent Andrew Bott, school committee members Barbara Scotto and Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, and also Deputy Superintendent Nicole Gittins are all on a delegation in China visiting our sister school and exchange partner in Xi'an. Deputy Superintendent Mary Ellen Dunn also could not be here because of a previously scheduled conference. So it's just me and Pip up here, and we really are thinking they kind of planned it this way, but we'll manage pretty well, we hope. Also, unfortunately, as Neil said, I would be remiss not to mention Joe. He is recovering from back surgery. He also says that the process did not cause the back pain he's having, but I'm not so sure about that. So just quickly, here's tonight's agenda. We'll go over the scope and purpose of the study quickly. We'll just sort of try to highlight and crystallize the challenge that Brookline is trying to solve. We'll go over some cost assumptions, so people are all on the same page of how costs are being figured. And then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which are HMFH site evaluations and the preliminary project estimates. After that, we will deal with Q&A from the boards. After that, we will deal with Q&A from the boards, and then we'll go, then we'll finish with upcoming meetings. So, so there's a lot to cover. For the boards and materials you have in front of you, you have a copy of all the slides, and then you also have copies of what we call evaluation sheets for each option. Those sheets are there for you to take notes on, jot things down to help you in your evaluation of the sites over the next month or so. You are welcome to write down your questions there as we go along and ask them at the time allotted. So the purpose and the scope of the study: in November, town meeting charged the town with conducting another site study that would expand the sites being considered. Instead of just looking at a single new ninth school, the charge was to consider additional sites and existing school sites to determine if a single site or a multiple site option would be the best approach. Here is a list of sites that have been investigated during this study. You can see there on the top half where it says Phase 1. This process is intended to lead to the board's selection of a multi-site solution or a single site solution that would then enter Phase 2, or the feasibility design phase. All along the way, it's been important to the community to have an open and transparent process over the past 3 years, and this is no exception. Joe Connolly has led a remarkably open and transparent process and has kept elected officials and public informed throughout. On these two slides, you'll see listed the 20 public updates and meetings that have occurred over the past 5 months. There have been regular updates to the boards, public listening sessions, public hearings. You'll see reference to the contractors and consultants we've been working with there, in addition to HMFH. There are two things that these slides don't capture that I just want to highlight. First of all, how many town departments have been helped out with the study along the way. Parks and Open Space, the Building Department, Public Works, Planning Department, Town Administrator's Office, the Legal Office, and even the Fire Department have all helped out considerably. The second piece that these slides don't capture is the incredible leadership, dedication, and integrity of Joe Connolly, who took on a very difficult project and has led an open, inclusive, and comprehensive process. I want to highlight the last bullet where it says town meeting representatives and interested citizens meetings upon request. Several were conducted. That's an understatement. I work just down the hall from where Joe works, and every week, and usually many times per week, a person or a small group of people would walk past my office. About an hour or two later, they'd come back the other way. They'd been meeting with Joe. He met with town meeting members, concerned citizens, even some lawyers. Joe met with whoever asked to meet with him. His policy was truly to have an open door, and we owe Joe a lot of this study. Still being worked on is the final report. Here is a table of contents of what will be in the final report. Like I said, we'll focus mostly on number 4 here. When the final report is finished, we'll post it on the school's website, and also all the members here will get a copy of them. I'm going to ask Pip to step up and just talk a little about this study and how it fits into all the studies that may proceed as we get into planning and construction.
So this slide is just to show you a sort of a brief outline of the steps to go through that we're going through to get through to design, development, and construction documents before the project is actually allowed to go out to bid. And at the moment, I want to point out that we're really just in this phase 1 of the project. I think we all are eager to get to very specific information on a lot of detail on these projects, but this first phase is really just meant to look at a broad array of options and hopefully move into a phase 2 where we're able to cut down the number of sites that we're looking at to just 1 or 2 sites, and then during that phase we'll investigate things in a greater level of detail. Even that is early in the project, and after that, with a specific site selected, the schematic design would work out details further, cost estimates in greater detail, and moving on to further and further detail with design, development, and construction documents.
Thank you, Pip. So the challenge, the real work tonight is to begin to identify a single or multi-site solution that addresses the many challenges Brookline faces because of the ongoing and historic enrollment growth. Since 2005, we've absorbed the equivalent of 3 K-8 schools into our existing buildings. Every school needs relief in some way. Our early education programs, currently we have 16 of our 21 BEEP classes outside of our K-8 schools. 11 of those are in rental space. Even with the new early education center that's being built, we will continue to have BEEP classes in rental space and outside of our school buildings. We have substandard spaces. At each school, we have created classrooms and learning spaces out of offices, locker rooms, hallways, and other spaces. Our core facilities are overtaxed and undersized. While we've been able to add classrooms, we've not been able to enlarge core spaces such as cafeterias, gyms, libraries, and hallways, leaving most of our schools with facilities that are too small to serve their students well. We have classes and rentals. At Baker and Pierce specifically, we have 6 classrooms and other learning spaces that are in rented space. And last is renovation and updated facilities. Driscoll and Pierce are overdue for renovation, with neither having substantial work done for over 30 years. Without adding significantly to our classroom inventory, we will not be able to address all of these challenges and provide relief across the system. Even if the solution that all of us come up with doesn't address all of these challenges, and it very well may not, we think it's important that the town develop a plan and timeline that does address all of these challenges. Here are a few details of the challenges we face. We'll start with enrollment. This is just 5 years back and 5 years forward. You'll see that what it doesn't show is that actually the growth in Brookline started in 2005. In 2005, we only had 3,900 students in our K-8s, and now you can see we're at 5,482, and we expect that to grow by another 300, actually almost 400 students in the next 4 years. Another challenge here is to figure out how many classrooms we need. This is the 3+ section school that was designed using the educational plan for the Baldwin Plan D school, and it still holds today. We anticipate that at the very minimum, there's 28 K-8 classrooms, also pre-K classrooms, ELL, English language learner classrooms, and also programs for substantially separate special education classes. That's a total of 37. But if you look at the notes here, what it doesn't address is still does not eliminate some of the suboptimal classrooms and undersized core facilities we talked about. It assumes elimination of rental spaces at Pierce and also Baker, and then it also it reduces reliance on rental space for BEEP. So this is probably, at our estimate, sort of about at least this is what we should say, because even if you create just one school that has these in them, you haven't addressed the facilities across all the schools. Another difficult question to answer is, where will the growth occur? Currently, there are a number of competing methodologies on how to determine where the need is. None of these methodologies are perfect. On this slide, we are showing anticipated growth based on where students live now in FY18 and where we project them to live in FY22, which is the earliest we can imagine having a project complete. This includes the known developments that were included in the recently released enrollment report, as well as those students in the METCO and materials fee programs. It shows a few things. In the most northern schools, Devotion, Pierce, Lawrence, and Driscoll, we anticipate growth by 223 students over the next 4 years. It also shows that the schools in the middle, Lincoln, Runkle, and Heath, stay pretty steady. And then in the south, in the Baker zone alone, we anticipate growth of about 120 students. Another important aspect in the community is the amount of open space that's available to the school, town, and community, both to use and to preserve. This slide summarizes the open space at our existing schools in total and per student. So total open space is in the first column. Some of our schools, Lawrence and Pierce specifically, have an adjacent town park that the school uses. And then on the far right, you have the square foot of open or play space that's per student for each school. In the farthest right column, it includes the nearby park. On the bottom half, you have the total projected square feet of open space for the proposed options that we'll go through later. On the second slide, you have, for the proposed options, what we had on our existing schools as well. So ultimately, you start with how much open space there is now, how much there would be after construction, and what the per student total would be for each school. This is useful for comparing for comparing the options to what our existing schools have. And then an important note about cost assumptions. As we go through this study tonight and over the next 4 months, we'll be referring to the preliminary project estimate in terms of costs. So these estimates that are preliminary include construction, renovation, demolition, soft costs, and escalation. HMFH has calculated escalation. They projected it forward to fall 2020. The beginning of construction, sort of essentially breaking ground. If breaking ground happens after fall 2020 for any reason, then the estimates would have to be adjusted. There are also additional costs for most options that are noted in the options we'll review, but they're not included in the ranges we provide. And these are important to point out because you'll be having to do some addition on top of the preliminary project estimates for most of the options. For swing space, the costs associated with relocating students when we are renovating or rebuilding an existing school. What we've shown for swing space costs here is our most recent example or most recent experience with it. That would be Devotion. For the 2 years that Devotion has been under construction, the costs have been approximately $7 million. Those costs include operating costs, CIP build-out, site improvements, and also transportation. It's reasonable to consider that experience as we consider swing space costs for the options that you'll see ahead of you. Land acquisition falls into two categories. First, the purchase. This could be for the purchase of a school site or as a land swap to allow the town to build on land that's protected. A couple of words about this and the example we use, which is the recent Sears Road sale of 4 lots of unimproved land. It's important to realize that even this estimate, which is $1.46 million per acre, may be considered a little bit low by some folks because these lots include wetlands and are difficult to access, so that actual price may be lower than comparable land that may be for sale or that the town may be able to purchase. And finally, eminent domain acquisition. The cost obviously associated with taking property to build a school. The most recent comparison that the town has is, of course, 111 Cypress Street. What we've given you here is the square footage, just over almost 39,000 square feet, and the pro tanto amount paid, which is $15.9 million. I'll hand it over to Pip now, and he'll get us started going through the proposed options. Thanks, Pip.
And staying here because you have a role in this. So Ben and I are going to attempt to sort of tag team this. We have various options to go through, and I'm going to move through them relatively quickly. And first, we have a series of 4 essentially 9th elementary school options, which is a standalone 3-section school or 27-classroom school on a new site. And then we have a variety of expand in place options that we'll look at. To look first at the standalone options. Some of these are going to be very familiar to you because they were developed during the previous 9th elementary school study. One of them is new. All of them will make use of the educational program that was developed for the 9th elementary school. So for the Putteram site, we have this is a site that is located adjacent to the Putteram Meadows Municipal Golf Course, and it's a wooded site that wraps around about 3 sides of Fire Station number 6. It's going to have a new entrance. We're proposing a new entrance to be located off of Hammond Street opposite Laurel Road. And that gives it a long entrance drive, which gives us plenty of queuing space on site for the vehicles. We also have space for a surface parking lot for about 90 cars.
So I'll talk about the evaluation criteria. On each of our options, there are 5 areas of evaluation criteria. On your evaluation sheets, you have the more detailed version of these slides, where we break out the evaluation criteria into specific items. Just to highlight a few things, especially for these options we're going to look at now, Putterham, the Baldwin options, and Pine Manor, they have an advantage of starting from scratch and creating a thoroughly modern school. This school, Putterhead, would create a second 3-section school in South Brookline, thereby avoiding a large single school on one site. All spaces meet MSBA standards. It's important to realize that by building in South Brookline, like some of the other options, this would expand the Common Core facilities in South Brookline, making new indoor space, gymnasium, auditorium, meeting space available for that part of the town which is in need of it. An important component of this design to consider is the proximity of the fire station. A new fire tower is under development. We've been working with the fire station and also the consultant that's designing that to get more information on that. And that's going to be an area that people want to dig into some more. And then the other piece is because of this land is protected by Article 97, so there would have to be a land swap. We estimate that land swap to be in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 acres of land needed to allow this to go forward. On the bottom of all these slides, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see the preliminary project estimate down here. Thank you. Thank you. Down in the lower right-hand corner. In this case, the estimate is $106 million. That is similar to the original cost of the Baldwin School, or Baldwin Plan D, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we also have to add the property acquisition cost for the land swap that I mentioned. Okay.
Okay. Next, we're going to show you the Baldwin Plan D that many of you are very familiar with. This is a two-story building that was replacing the existing Baldwin School and making use of some of the Sewell Recreation Center property for parking and queuing, and also providing improvements to the Sewell Recreation Center. Yeah.
Great. So looking at the evaluation criteria for Baldwin Plan D, again, a brand new facility, which would allow South Brookline to have 2 3+ section schools as opposed to one very large one someplace. Again, it expands the Common Core facilities in South Brookline, as I mentioned before. Another advantage of the Baldwin Plan D is its work and its sort of partnership with Sewell Recreation Center and Parks and Recreation. It would make significant improvements in the Sewell site, both in the parking area to allow better access, but also in terms of handicap accessibility to the site, as well as making improvements to the landscape and the field there. As many of you know, this a part of the Baldwin property is LWCF protected. Sewell Rec is Article 97 protected. So this option would also require a land swap. As we point out there at the bottom, where the preliminary project estimate is, it would be $103 million. Okay. And plus property acquisition costs for Article 97 land swap. We estimate that land swap or that need to be in the 4+ acre range.
Okay. And in an attempt to avoid the issues with Article 97, there was this plan developed called Baldwin North, which is creating a much more compact building. This was a 5-story building located right near Heath Street in order to leave open all of the Sewell Recreation Center entirely and the play space in the rear of Baldwin, which is also protected by Article 97. So this retains existing trees on the existing site and retains all of the existing open space. Because of the limited site, it's got a parking garage located underneath the building, and it has relatively limited on-site queuing space.
So going on with Baldwin North, a couple of things to point out here. So as we've seen in a traffic study from Vanessa and Associates, the drop-off and pick-up and the queuing capacity is very limited on site. The bus drop-off and pick-off is essentially pickup is not on site. It's on Heath Street, actually. The lack of on-site queuing was going to impact traffic on Heath Street, and the proximity to the Heath and Hammond intersection, we believe, will significantly, or Vanessa Associates has told us, will significantly impact that intersection and all the traffic are in that neighborhood. If I go back to the diagram here for a second, you'll see all access is right there. All access to the school site is just from essentially one entrance there on Heath Street. Another comment to make is that it is a tight site because we're trying to get the entire school on the northern portion of the Baldwin property. That leads to a five-story school, and as Pitt mentioned, a parking structure underneath. You'll see at the bottom here, it says adjusted preliminary project estimate, $117 million. This and also Baldwin Plan D have been adjusted upwards from earlier numbers you've seen because JLA, when they did their estimates, they just didn't project the escalation of the cost as far ahead as HMFH is now. Yeah, and they also we believe, did not include the soft costs in their estimates?
It included some soft costs. What we did is we used the soft cost numbers, the percentages that we actually saw on the devotion school, and we found that that was higher than what had been assumed in the estimates for the earlier study.
Great. Both good estimates done at different times with some different assumptions, but I just wanted people to know, as you see, even though Baldwin Plan D and Baldwin North are the same educational plan, there's some difference in the cost. This is also higher than Baldwin Plan D because of the underground parking primarily.
And this is the Pine Manor site, and as you know, this would involve an eminent domain taking of a portion of the property from Pine Manor. The meandering floor plan here is planned to work with the existing topography. So an advantage is that it gives a two-story building facing the street, even though it's a three-story building facing in the other direction. There's adequate space on site for all of the queuing that's required for cars. And underneath the building, we're providing parking for most of the vehicles, and there's some surface parking also. This is parking for 90 vehicles.
Before you switch, one thing I want to point out that's actually on both slides that we haven't been mentioning, but is very, very important, is just the additional capacity here. So you'll see this on all the slides, how many classrooms are involved in the option, typically how many sections are added, how many seats are added, and then the net addition to the town schools inventory. That's on both slides, and we'll point that out as we go forward. In terms of some of the evaluation criteria, so again, new construction here in South Brookline on the Pine Manor site creates all new modern facilities. It's a similar design to Baldwin Plan D in terms of the interior. Pip already mentioned that drop-off and pickup can happen on site. If there is access to Woodland Road, that would further reduce any impact on Heath Street. It again expands the Common Core facilities in South Brookline, which are much needed. And as it says there, the project estimate is $120 million plus property acquisition costs. Okay.
So now I'm going to go to some of the expand and place sites, and first I'm going to look at the Baker and Pierce School, where each of them have multiple options for expansion. And I'll talk about the number of classrooms added here because it's a little bit more involved when we're expanding in place. So first I want to mention the principles that were used with all of the options for developing the Baker site. And so this is one option, but you'll see it in all of the other options. In this case, we really are trying to minimize the impact of the new construction on the wetlands. You'll always see that access road that loops along the bottom does have an impact on the wetland buffer zone, but you'll see that the plans are working to minimize that impact. Also in each case, we're working to preserve open space. For instance, the ball field you'll see always there. Sometimes it's shifted. And we're also looking where we can to find smaller additional play areas to augment the play space on the site. In each of the cases, we are extending the parking area and service road that goes around the back of the existing Baker School. We're extending that out to Beverly Road to provide a very long queuing space off of Beverly Road. It allows us to preserve the existing parking that we have for the Baker School, and also allows us to get access to structured parking underneath each of the new construction options that you'll see. Actually, staying with that, this option is what we call Baker K5, 6, 7, 8. This is a 6-section option. It adds a total of 17 classrooms to the mix. This scheme renovates the Baker School and takes down this D and E wing that sort of take up a lot of space here, creating a much more compact element there, so that we're able to create the kinds of support spaces and 21st century learning spaces that we need. And that will house the grades K through 5, and then this proposes a new 6, 7, 8 building being built next to it.
So as Pip said, this is a 6-section school. However, the upper and lower school design, it does minimize the sense of an overly large school, which has been expressed by a number of folks. The equity of instructional space within the school is important, because as students went, although the buildings, the K-5 building and the 6-8 building would be different in terms of how modern or how new they are, kids as they move through the building would have the same experience within any given grade. This, like most of the options for Baker, is getting drop-off and pick-up and queuing on site. That will significantly, from the traffic reports we've gotten, estimates, that will reduce quite a bit of the impact on Beverly Road, and also the increase in parking will reduce that impact as well. In terms of open space, it maintains the existing open space and adds some as well, as Pip pointed out, on the left-hand side in an area that's now wooded. That at the same time, that wooded area on site will be impacted and made into place, to open and play space. So this adds 17 net classrooms. It becomes a 6-section capacity, which is equal to 1,100 seats or students at maximum. And the preliminary project estimate is $184 million, plus the swing space cost. Now that we're into the expand in place options on existing sites, you'll see most of them have the swing space costs. And just as a reminder, our most recent experience with that has been Devotion at about $7 million over 2 years.
Okay. Next, we look at a slightly smaller version. This is what we call Baker 5. It's a 5-section school. It really is the Devotion School program, exactly. And in this case, we preserve most of the Baker School, only eliminating the E wing, a little 1-story wing that sticks out the back, so that we could provide this addition, expansion that you see. This, because the impact we're having on the existing school is relatively minor, it allows you some flexibility with the extent of the renovations that you do. So when you look at our cost spreadsheets, you'll see that some options have a range, and I think that we describe them as minimum renovation and full renovation. And when we have an option of doing different amounts of renovation, we're showing you that cost range from a low to a high.
So the biggest difference between this option and the other Baker options, that it's creating a 5-section school. The other ones are either creating two 3-section schools or 1 6-section school. So the capacity is a little bit different. It would be 945 seats, just like the new Devotion, and that's an addition of 9 classrooms in net. Again, aiming to get almost all or most of the drop-off and pickup on site, as well as the bus. There's additional parking, which will also impact Beverly Road favorably. As Pip said, in terms of the designs, this one is the one that probably impacts the wetland zone the least. And then the range, as it says here, is 92 to 139 to 138 million dollars. Sorry, again plus a swing space cost. And again, that range is due to the amount of renovation that the town would decide to do on the existing Baker buildings. There on the right-hand side in the dark blue. That's what provides such a significant difference in that range.
Okay, so this is now what we're calling Baker 3-3, option 1. This is a 6-section option. The size in terms of student population of the first Baker option, we looked at 1,100 students, adding 17 classrooms to the mix. But in this case, it's being planned as 2 independent 3-section schools on the site. This reduces the existing Baker school to a 3-section school, allowing you within the footprint of the existing school to sort of right-size the support spaces and to take things that are being used as classroom space and turn them over to some of the specialty spaces that a modern school really needs. And then there is a new 3-section school constructed adjacent to it. Here you can see the play area is shifted slightly, but the softball field is still there. And then we find places around the site to put play structure areas and things like that.
Thank you, Pip. So again, 2 separate 3-section schools on one site. While it's a lot of students on that site, it does avoid the idea of a large single 6-section school, creating 2 separate and distinct schools. You'll see the range here in terms of project estimate. That's based on, again, on how much renovation is done at the existing school. That's really crucial because there is the potential on this plan to have 2 very separate and distinct schools, one of which is much newer, obviously, and much more modern than the other one, especially if you do a limited renovation at the existing Baker school. And that equity of program, equity of sort of quality was one concern certainly we heard during this process. That's something to consider. Again, it has the potential to expand and right-size all the core facilities at Baker. It also does address as we showed you earlier, the 1,000 plus enrollment need in the Baker district that we anticipate going forward. The existing open space is maintained in terms of open space, not play space, I should say, is maintained, but now, of course, you're dealing with additional students. So the open space or play space per student does decrease in this design. As we said, this capacity would be 1,100 seats, similar to a 6-section school, but it's divided across the 2 schools, plus 17 classrooms across the district, and the range is 109 million to 163 million, depending on the level of renovation on the existing Baker school, and then you also have to add in swing space costs.
So this next one is Baker 3-3, option 2. It's the same educational program as the previous one. The difference here is that where in the previous option we were pushing the new construction away from the existing Baker school so that Baker essentially could remain in whole, giving you flexibility with the amount of renovation you do. In this case, we said, let's take off the sort of inefficient D and E wings that take up a good amount of the site, and let's build a more compact addition, attaching it directly to the building. So, because that will wind up with you having a full renovation of the Baker school. Again, existing Baker being reduced from its current enrollment to a 3-section school, so that certain things like the cafeteria are right-sized, and we have a more compact school, so we have a little bit more play area, and we have again the new 3-section school being built to the west of it.
So this is similar to option 1. The primary difference is the more significant upgrade of the Baker facilities due to the new addition that Pip just explained. It would allow for equity of instructional spaces across the 2 schools. Another difference is that it's adding more parking on the site in terms of 80 cars, and that would more positively impact Beverly Road there. In terms of the Baker options, this one probably has the most positive impact on, public spaces or community spaces in South Brookline, because you're upgrading you're adding gym, auditorium, meeting space, public space at the new school, and then upgrading the ones, the existing Baker School, so they've got more capacity. Again, the play and open space is maintained but shared by 2 schools, as before. In terms of the size, it's the same as the previous, the Baker 303 option 1, with 1,100 seats. For this, the preliminary project estimate is $184 million, plus, of course, the swing space costs. The difference there is obviously a more complete renovation of the existing Baker School. We're just over halfway in terms of the options. I haven't seen people wilt quite yet. Does anyone need a stretch break? We're doing okay?
No, just, let's power through it.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So now we're going to go on to the 4 Pierce School options, a very different school than the Baker, very different site. And each of these options have been designed also with certain principles in mind. The first thing I want to say is that the Pierce School is an unusual building which has a lot of handicap accessibility problems. They tend to be difficult and expensive to fix. There are regulations in our disability code in Massachusetts that says that if we spend more than $5 million renovating the Pierce School, we're going to be required to bring the entire facility up to today's accessibility code. And so you will see that a wide range in costs for the renovations of the Pierce School, where one is to do a very minimal renovation where you're putting a cap on the renovation at $5 million. The other is to bring the building up to accessibility. We're estimating that will cost on the order of $70 to $80 million. So there's a big range there. Now, when we're building a new building adjacent to the Pierce School, we're always putting a new parking garage below it. Sometimes it's an extension to the parking garage that's below Pierce at the moment. We are always renovating the historic Pierce building, the Pierce Primary School. And the main play space remains across School Street, where it is right now today. This also assumes in, I think, all the options that we're looking at, the purchase of certain commercial properties on Harvard Street.
So in this example, similar to the Baker K5, 6, 7, 8, it is a 6-section school. However, it is divided across 2 different buildings. These 2 different buildings could be different configurations. You could conceivably have 6 through 8 in the light blue building. You could also have K through 2. That hasn't been determined yet, but that opens up some options for which grouping you'd like to have separate like that. So the minimum renovations at the existing school would include upgrades to classrooms and building acoustics. As Pip just described, those upgrades, the minimum renovations are quite limited, because if you get across that threshold of, I think, $5 million or so, then you automatically trigger the jump up to bringing all the facilities up to code on a variety of measures. So that's why you see that range in the price there. Of course, need to point out that it's a very restricted urban site, which limits flexibility. The existing open space is reduced by 2,000 square feet total, and of course, you're adding students as well. So in this case, the per student play space has diminished as well. In this option for Pierce, the need for swing space is reduced a little bit, because you can potentially build the new building first while the original buildings are fully operational. However, if you do a full renovation of the existing building, then you would trigger a really significant need for swing space, which is the same as we'll see on other Pierce designs. This design would require, for where the new blue building is there, the acquisition of both 62 and 68 Harvard Street. So just to sum up, 1,100 seats at this new school. Pierce has in the order of 800 right now, 17 new classrooms, and the range is $108 million to $173 million because of that sort of crossing a threshold on code renovations. And of course, we also have to add in property acquisition of the two properties, plus in this case, possible swing space costs.
Yeah, now I'll point out that what makes this, that sort of flexible renovation cost, you'll see how the new construction is entirely disengaged from the existing Pierce building. That's what gives you the flexibility to decide how much money you want to put into the existing Pierce building. And then when I move to this option, which is Pierce 5, option 1, you'll see that our new addition is actually engaging directly into the Pierce building, creating a single facility. Because you're doing that, the only option you have is a full renovation option. You won't see that range of costs with this. This 5-section school is, again, the same educational program as the Devotion School. And again has parking below the existing building, and it does increase cafeteria, provides new gym space, new administration space, and makes other significant improvements to the existing Pierce facility.
So unlike the other Pierce options, one you've seen, the ones you will see this option limits to 5 sections on the site instead of 6 total sections. The new construction and right sizes common core spaces, improves them. Depending on the level of renovation, all the core spaces could be improved. It does maintain the existing open space in the Pierce School Street playground, but of course this is it's an increase of students, not as dramatic as the other plans. So you're not reducing these per student play space as significantly as the other Pierce options. We have 8 net classroom increase, and one thing to point out, as Pip already said, is the swing space and the phasing would add both to the timeline and to the cost as well. And the need for swing space could be significant here. The preliminary project estimate is $142 million, plus the acquisition of 1 property, and then the additional swing space cost as well.
So this is Pierce 5, option 2. It's exactly the same program, except that in this case we said, well, let's like we did with the first one you looked at, let's separate the new building from the old building to give us that flexibility between how much you renovate the existing Pierce building. And so that someone doesn't sort of look quickly through the code and get back to us and say, hey, there's no $5 million threshold. It isn't really a $5 million threshold. What it is 30% of the assessed value of the building, which is approximately $5 million. And that's where the $5 million comes from. So this is an option very much like the previous option, with the exception that you have a separate new facility, so you're given flexibility with how much money you decide to put into the renovation of the Pierce School.
Great. So this has 5 sections, but they're, of course, as it points out, distributed over the buildings, so you don't have a feel of such a large school. Again, whether or not which grade levels are in that new building would be up to further planning. There is equity of instructional space based on the grade, so every second grader would have the same experience in this building as another, because you would make any renovations cover full grade or full grade levels. The construction of the new 3-grade building there on Harvard Street reduces the need for swing space, which is a significant advantage. And then also, as Pip said, so this becomes 945 seats, a full 5-section school like the new Devotion will be. It adds 8 classrooms. The range here is pretty significant, from $70 million and the low preliminary project estimate to 148. That again is based on how much renovation is done at the existing buildings to see that significant range.
Okay. And the final Pierce option is sort of saying, well, what if we just got rid of the existing Pierce building and placed new construction there? And so this is Pierce 3, a new Pierce 3-3. So this is two independent three-section schools located on the site. One of the two schools does make use of the Pierce Primary for a number of its classroom spaces. And the other hovers there at the corner of School and Harvard Street. One of the things I want to point out about this option is because it removes all of the parking that's below the existing piers. In addition to school parking, there's a significant amount of municipal parking. So in this option, we're presuming that we'd have to replace school parking plus municipal parking, and I think we're estimating something like 200 spaces would be required underneath the facility. This is all new construction. Pierce would have to be completely emptied out, so it has significant swing space costs. Oh, let me point out one more thing. This is because we've compacted things into the footprint of the existing building. We are able to, if the properties on Harvard Street are purchased, you can establish a certain amount of open new play space on the site, which other options haven't had that much opportunity to do.
Thank you, Pat. So again, the two separate three-section schools, the 3+ section schools, avoids the experience of a large single school. Because both buildings are new, you have equity instructional space, you avoid the concern of having one, school to be of, more modern and the other one having inferior facilities. It's important to note that the existing open space remains intact, and as Pip said, if we are able to acquire 62 and 68, you actually would increase the open play space by 27,000 plus square feet. One of the real challenges here is the swing space required. You essentially would have to move the entire school off to a location to be determined. That has worked out quite well in the Devotion case, but it's also challenging, always will be challenging to find that amount of swing space. Phasing will also lengthen the construction time because of that. So in terms of 1,100 seats across two schools, that equals 6 sections, but it's in 2 3-section schools. That's 17 additional classrooms. The project estimate here is $225 million plus property acquisition of 2 properties if one chooses to do that to expand the.
So I'm going to violate my rule and just make a comment or,
Yeah.
so this is the $250 million solution?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
that is accurate.
Because when you add property acquisition, $250 million. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. Go ahead.
Okay. So now we're going to look at 2 expand in place options at Driscoll and Heath. In each of these cases, we're going to be taking the existing school and expanding it to be an honest 4-section school, meaning having the proper amounts of support spaces that's required. For the Driscoll, we're proposing that a new a multi-story addition be added to the sort of the southeast end of the building, replacing what is currently a sort of an undersized gymnasium, and we'd be building a new gymnasium with this. This keeps the tennis courts open in this space. We are also going to be expanding the cafeteria, as you see in the orange area, expanding out into the parking area there. Cafeteria and kitchen space gets expanded, and then the building, the entire building gets a renovation. Now, I want to say that we're in this case we're preserving the green space on Washington Street and the play area, the sort of play structure area that's there too. But what we're proposing is that the parking lot that's located here, located off of, our access off of Washington Street, be sort of extended because it goes down underneath the existing play space. So you're getting garage parking for about 50 cars, and with a new place structure, sort of a play space on the roof of the facility.
Pip, did you mention that the tennis courts remain untouched?
I think I did.
Okay, good, because that's important to a lot of folks. Okay, so, so a lot of our schools have, well, I'll just point out one thing. Driscoll has some of our largest class sizes in the district at this point. That can change year to year, but that's currently the case with class sizes 25, 26, in some cases a little bit bigger. This would expand Driscoll to be a true four-section school and needed moderate renovation. As I said before, both Pierce and Driscoll have not been significantly renovated in over 30 years. Significantly for the Driscoll, this renovates core spaces, particularly the cafeteria, which right now is and the kitchen prep area, which now are too small. They would align them with the MSBA standards. It would maintain the existing open space, as Pip already said, and possibly add a new play area. Swing space would not be needed for the added classrooms. You can be building the addition on while school maintains regular activities for the most part. And also property acquisition is not required. You'd also increase the parking capability on the site and thereby reducing some of the impact on the local streets as well. And then again, on the bottom there, so it'd be 758 seats, so true four section, you'd be adding 9 classrooms, 9 classroom capacity. And the range there is from $60 million to 83 on the preliminary project estimate, and that is solely due to the range of renovations that would be considered for Driscoll. This is the last option.
The final option is Heath, also being expanded to become a 4-section school. In the Heath option, also, we're taking an undersized gymnasium, which is located to the west of on the east side of the school, and expanding it to be a 2-story classroom facility. We're then replacing with a full-size gym on the west side of the building, sort of along the entrance drive that comes in the rear. We're also expanding cafeteria and kitchen space in order to right-size that for a 4-section school. Additional parking that's required for this expansion could be provided through surface parking, and we're preserving the sledding hill that's to the west of the school.
Pip covered most of this. I think just one piece here is that with the renovation, the core spaces would align with MSBA standards, so the core spaces are being improved, particularly the cafeteria and the kitchen, which is much needed. You mentioned the sledding hill, that's good. And then swing space and phasing would be required if a full renovation is done. It is important to point out that not too long ago, Heath did have a partial renovation that was funded by MSBA. We aren't expecting to touch those areas. That's right.
Right. Well, that's not completely true. There's the classroom wing that was added here, but part of what was added was the cafeteria, which is undersized, so you really have to deal with that.
Okay. Yep. Great. Thank you. And then the estimate there, again, 750 seats, so a full 4-section school. 9 classroom addition, and the preliminary project estimate ranges from 63 million to 75, just not based on the level of renovation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just to review cost assumptions here. So preliminary project estimate, you'll see what that includes. The escalation is projected to begin construction or groundbreaking begins fall 2020. You can use those swing space costs comparable if you're doing math at home. Land acquisition is really just the most recent comparison, and then eminent domain, we haven't really got. We're not sharing details about what the square footage of the, particularly the 2 Harbor Street properties, or any others at this point. Pip is going to go through, this is hard to read on the screen or on your papers, but just to go through these two summary of costs, these sort of summary slides, will explain what's on here. Oh, sure, yep. So I think I'll get this right, and if other folks want to, reported to both the select board and school committee at the mid-phase report, I think before, was what school, actually, well, you did the work, why don't you explain it?
I actually missed the question.
Oh, why was Lincoln pulled off?
Oh, well, we actually did look at Lincoln. We looked at ways of adding to the Lincoln School. We honestly couldn't find a good way of doing it. We looked at additions in the back. We looked also at possibly extending out into the play area, the recessed play area. We imagined that that would be a non-starter in such a historic area. So it was, relatively early on, after we did some looking at it, decided to shelve that option. Oh, yeah, and then and hopefully you can see this on your spreadsheet that you have, although I know it's sort of small. Just to explain how this is set up, first of all, we have a description of the option on the left with a little diagram of each option to sort of remind you. This orange band here in the center tells you the net amount of classrooms that are added. Sometimes you might not be able to tell sort of exactly where that number comes from because certain classrooms are taken out of service and used for other things, but that's why we call it the net increase in classrooms. And then we go through some calculations here. These numbers here on the right-hand side in orange are the total estimated, the preliminary total estimated project costs. When you have an option that takes up two columns and you have two numbers, that's that minimum and full renovation number that we talked about. And then as you go further to the right, you will see an unpriced, but you'll see a star, I mean not a star, a dollar sign placed where we have swing space costs that haven't been added into this number, and also where we have property acquisition costs that have not been added into the number. If you go through these numbers, you see the cost of parking and certain other details like that. How much is new construction? How much is renovation? I want to point out that all of these numbers are escalated, as Ben had said, to assuming a construction start at the beginning of during the year 2020. And they all include project costs, which is all the soft costs, fees and furniture and equipment, surveys and things like that, testing, but it does not include the cost of swing space and the cost of property acquisition. On this first page, you have the 4 options of Baker and the 4 options of Pierce. And on the second page, it starts with Driscoll and Heath. It goes to then the 4 Ninth Elementary School options, the standalone options, starting with Putteram, and then the Baldwin Plan D, Baldwin North, and Pine Manor. I won't go through the numbers unless people have specific questions.
Let me just add one more piece is, on the farthest right-hand column of this page, you'll see that we also have included the estimate for how much land may need to be acquired for a land swap. I think it's for land swap, and also whether it's Article 97 related. And on the first page there, where you see $2 signs underneath property acquisition, that means 2 properties. $1 sign means 1 property or 1 piece of land. So here are the upcoming, well, no, let's hold on that. This now is the time for questions and answers from the boards and the members. And we of course did that as quickly as we could. We can go into depth on any particular area you'd like. Just ask away and we'll do our
Okay,
best.
let me just say a few things before we get into a little bit of Q&A and some discussion. So, first of all, this is a daunting amount of information, and it's going to be essential that we approach this in kind of a structured way. and the evaluation sheets are one attempt at that. I'm not convinced it's the best attempt, but it's an attempt. What I'm going to ask staff over the next few weeks is to kind of help us perhaps with some suggested bundles that we can get our arms around and help us and the public get through this. In my mind, not only do we need to consider the education plan of the school, how good a school it's going to be, whether we expand in place or we have a new school, the project cost really is going to be essential. And I just want everybody to take the numbers you see up here, a little bit of grain of salt. They're intended to be kind of orders of magnitude. They're based on very, very preliminary concepts using standard square footage costs of construction. And as a site is chosen and we get deeper into design, these costs can change. So just because a project, we see a $60 million number up at the first one, it might be a little more, it might be a little less, hopefully a little less. There is a fair amount of I was going to say fluff, but no, that's not fluff. It's contingency built into it. But I'll also, I did a few calculations. When I saw some of the numbers and some of the larger projects, and then realizing that we would have to do multiple projects together. So if you start with the big one at Pierce, which when you add in land acquisition, it might come in at, call it $250 million, and then we have to do another project. If we're looking at a $300 million, and all of this is going to have to go to the voters with an override, we're looking at at 5% borrowing costs. We're looking at a 10% increase in taxes. In comparison, a $100 million project, we're looking at a 3.36 increase in taxes, much less. So the costs are going to be paramount in my thinking, and I'm sure in many of the other folks up here, especially my friends on the advisory committee, and that's your job as the town's finance committee to hold our feet to the fire on the costs. I'll also say with the Putterham site especially, we already know that there are some challenges with the site. The challenges were highlighted. It's on a state road next to the Horace James Circle, and that provides some challenges. It's next to the fire station, the fire training facility, and we know we require a land swap. So we know all those things, and we're working through those challenges. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're working through them. So with that, let me open it up to questions. Mr. Sandman, and then...
I've been doing some calculations as we've gone along here, and for any of the build from scratch, build brand new schools, you're talking about on the average $5 million a classroom and 27 classrooms. For any of the other options, the least expensive cost per classroom is $6 million, running up to $9 million, or in one case, $17 million. I'm very glad that you raised the issue of cost. Indeed, we are the Finance Committee. And looking at the cost side of it, it becomes very difficult to see how adding 17 here and 9 there or 8 there for an average cost per classroom of $9 or $10 million versus building a new school with 27 classrooms at an average cost of $5 million a classroom. It becomes very difficult to justify the higher cost element, even if there are very substantial litigation costs. There's no way that they can even vaguely approach, that the cost of new schools can even vaguely approach the cost of some of these other options.
Though, of course, with litigation, it's time, right? Mr. Lynn Jones.
This follows up on that question, but in a slightly different way, because when I look at the cost picture here, what I really want to know is, over the next 10 years, how much are we going to be spending on school capital projects? And one of the early comments that was repeated was that both Driscoll and Pierce are way overdue for renovation. And we probably should assume that we are going to invest in renovating both of those schools within 10 years, maybe sooner, but in that same time frame that we're going to be adding the capacity with an additional school or otherwise. And as I added up the numbers in very rough terms, sort of using your $250 million figure, you could spend $250 million looking at these numbers and generate about 27 new classrooms at 2 or 3 sites. Or you could spend a little bit less than half that amount at a South Brookline site and generate that amount. And the difference is, $5 million per classroom versus 9 or 10 million. But the question is, how much are we going to spend renovating Driscoll and Pierce anyway over the next, 5-10 years? Will it be 50 million, 100 million, 150 million? Because once you get up into the higher range, you're looking at a total capital cost for all these projects in the $250 million or more range. And if you can achieve that renovation and also add capacity, it may come out to be a wash or maybe even better. I don't know. You have to do the analysis of the alternatives here. And there's also one big underlying question, because we talked about minimum renovation and maximum renovation. Are we going to make a decision to do a minimal renovation to ensure that a school will not become ADA compliant so that we can keep costs down and tell that particular school community that it's getting a very small investment because we're refusing to make them ADA compliant, because that raises some equity issues. But in realistically estimating how much we're going to spend on the renovations, we're going to have to look at that policy and equity question, and it may be that the renovations are very expensive or maybe not. But there are a lot of moving parts here, but just doing the numbers quite quickly, it doesn't seem implausible that when you compare renovation plus a 9th school, it's going to equal the same as a 2 or 3 site solution.
Right, and then there's another moving piece. We have applied to the MSBA for partnership with them. So we shouldn't assume necessarily that a renovation of, say, Pierce, for example, or Driscoll for that matter, if that were to be the second phase of a multi-phase solution over the next 10 years, that we would be on the hook for the whole thing.
Of course, there are 2 moving parts there, too. Does partnering with the MSBA drive up our costs compared to not partnering with them? And does the reimbursement that we receive offset any increased costs? And it gets very complicated.
Mr. Franco and then Mr. Doggett.
I just want to go back for a moment and endorse Chair Wyszynski's comment about the need to put packages together. I note that none of these projects achieve the 36 classrooms that were articulated as a need at the beginning of the presentation, and I'm going to leave that number unchallenged for a second. I think we probably need to come back to it for a variety of different reasons. But because we're not getting to 36, it means we've got to combine 1, 2, maybe more of these different options together to achieve the desired goal. I also note that the costs that are shown here are flat. It assumes that everything is done in the same year, which I think is implausible for several reasons. First, I don't know if we're going to go and ask for $250 million in borrowing authority, debt exclusion of that amount, in one fell swoop. I'm also not sure that we've got the capacity in the town to oversee more than one of these projects at the same time. So in addition to packaging together, blending together some of these projects, I'd also like to see some cost numbers that anticipate a phased expenditure of those funds and a phased project rollout.
Mr. Doggett?
Thank you. I'd just like to add to Mr. Lynn Jones's comments about the need, and to Mr. Franco, the need to consider operating costs of the different solutions. For example, busing for the Potterum or the Baldwin site, whatever, might be a consideration. Extra ground staff, the overhead for operating a standalone school as opposed to the incremental cost of adding to an existing school. So a total package, and over a 10-year or a 20-year period, a $500,000 busing cost could add up to $10 million, which adds a significant amount into those numbers. And not to mention, I think also the land acquisition cost has clearly got to be added in. So, Mr. Salmon, oh, you did? Okay, good. You got a cheap deal, I guess. So I think looking at the total cost package is an important aspect of the work that needs to be done.
Mr. Ollips?
I hear what you're saying, Mr. Lynn Jones. However, the problem with this is we have the problem today. We need a solution today, and by doing 3 different projects, as everybody says, there's not the capacity in the town, nor is there the money, the ability to borrow that kind of money. We need to find a solution that works for the schools by relieving these Pierce and Driscoll of the population that they have. We can manage in those schools, and people will, I mean, it won't be perfect. Yes, they need renovations. I'm not saying they don't. But we can wait for MSBA to help us out, because we will have had a solution that already takes the numbers of kids out of the schools that are totally overwhelmed. And the renovations won't be as costly, because also we won't have to expand, since we're making them appropriate sized schools, the 3-section at Driscoll and 3 to 4 section at 4-section at Pierce, which it is presently. You don't have to expand the capacity of the interior spaces. You may have to renovate. We already renovated, actually, the auditorium at Pierce, so we have a head start on that one.
I see the logic. I just like to see the analysis and the numbers to
Yeah, I mean, but
show
you
that we're
have-
not going to spend more in the long run by trying to solve our problems incrementally than we would if we take a holistic view.
But the holistic view, yes, we may, I don't know for sure the numbers, I would like to see them too. But by trying to do all of it, first of all, we can't do it all at once. You know, the incremental ways of doing it is going to take at least another 10 years. Either way, it's 10 years, whatever you do. I mean, it won't be if you have a new school. And that was actually the question, because we're supposed to be asking questions. I know I'm taking a lot of time, and I apologize. You used 2020 as the date to begin. However, if we were to really make a decision in the near future, like in the next month or so, as to an option and move forward on a new school, would it really have to take till 2020? Or could we start getting some shovel in the ground by 2019 or earlier?
I think that the numbers sort of that we were aiming at was like September of 2020, and it's possible you could move that earlier in 2020. I think it'll take a year of schematic design. It'll take probably a little bit more than a year of schematic design, design development, and construction documents to get the project to go out to bid. I would say it would take you approximately a year to do DD, design development and construction documents, but we have a schematic design phase that has to come before that and after the phase 2 of the study that will occur. So there's a lot of sort of months that have to get stacked up there.
Ms. Schreiner-Older.
question about the assumptions that you're making. And when you talk about swing space for devotion, have you taken into account in those numbers that we're utilizing Old Lincoln School? And is there a cost that you've attributed to that use Old Lincoln School and considered what the swing space cost would be in reality if Old Lincoln School is being utilized by the high school and we actually have to rent two, the 7 million, is that for the rental of a half of a school and we would need a rental of a full school? Does that double? And how did you make that?
Sure, yeah, sure. So a couple things were included in there and some were not, which I think balance out, but again, it's not a perfect number. So for example, we included the CIP build out at Old Lincoln, which happened the year before Upper Devotion moved in, but we did not include any of the costs for the renovation of Webster Place because the landlord paid for those. We include transportation in this situation and operating costs. So I think it's a wash. It's important to know that in any, if you're finding swing space that wouldn't be Old Lincoln, okay, if it's not Old Lincoln, right, that's the best swing space we have. We've used it for many things over many years. There's just so many variables. Where is the space? Will it be busing involved? What's the nature of the space? How much rebuilding or renovation has to happen? Who's paying for that renovation? In this case, we didn't for Webster Place. Again, that's what we know of devotion. Is it necessarily predictive of the next swing space? Probably not exactly, but I think there's, we have in there most of what you would consider if you're going to a different swing space that we didn't already own and wasn't move-in ready. So, yeah.
Ms. Fetterspiel?
Hello, thanks. Do we have an update at all or new information regarding both lawsuits and land acquisition? We heard a lot last fall, but I haven't heard anything recently. I don't know if we have any new updates, and also what the time delay might be in that.
So in your packet, you have a legal memo that Jonathan Simpson and the legal counsel office put together. That'll be posted on the website when the rest of the packets are probably next week. So that's a good summary.
And Mr. Loomis, I'll say that the answer to that question is probably more appropriate in executive session. A counsel who has been threatening to sue us is sitting in the audience.
But the legal memo that's been distributed is for public reading.
And it's a public document, yeah, exactly.
Mr. Glover.
I think this is a different question, but with respect to land swaps, Article 97 land swaps, what is the current thinking about the feasibility of a land swap in the sense of, what is the process, if we were to embark on a project that required a land swap, how would we go about identifying it? Perhaps this is a question not just for you, but for all of us. And do we think, particularly with the Putterham site, that there's a sufficient amount of land available to swap?
We're working on it.
All right.
I could answer that.
Anybody else?
Just a quick question about Driscoll School. I understand that there's a brook that was dead-ended and buried in the area of where we're building, where you propose parking cars. And has that been investigated, and do we know what's going on there?
Yes, and the parking garage craftily does not involve the brook. It slips along, as I understand, essentially the front of the, I don't know why I do the building.
It's in the gray stripe between the green and the orange.
Exactly.
I thought it ran across the play area.
No, it goes north. It goes down the length of the site in between those two. Yeah. It's culverted. It's a culvert. It's running water in an underground pipe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right there.
So we're aware of it.
As long as you're aware of it, that's on.
It's a pipe.
The whole tannery work that they did.
Let me, I guess, start trying to bring this, Mr. Doggett.
Another question, comment concerning the capacity and where we put it. I think I wrote to the assembled group here today, this afternoon, concerning a view of the chart so far, Ben, on the enrollment growth by residency. Historically, the school department has done a fabulous job, I think, in terms of the annual enrollment report, which is a great piece of work, and has historically, up until about 2 months ago, been used as the way in which we predict capacity. And bottom line is the capacity issue seems to be in largely North Brookline, 2/3 of it, and 1/3 in South Brookline, in terms of overcrowding in the north, in the northern schools, and to the Baker, which represents the southern. So the new implementation of which is shown, I think, on page 6 in the presentation. Oh, thank you, Ben. Is one based on residency. For example, if you look at Heath FY18 460, it actually is 564 today, actual seats in the class, students going to Heath School. So that is a number which has been sort of normalized to, if it was just of local a local residency-based system, assignment system that we had, it would be 460. My question is, my feeling is a comment, this methodology is distorting, potentially distorting the capacity, so that here on that chart, if you tease it out, the capacity seems to be equal, about 200 in the north is required and 200 in the south, whereas in fact, I believe that possibly is different, and the only reason I say that is because of the enrollment model. Another, Dave Gayshok has also contributed to this in the email thread that you received, and he has a different residency model, as it turns out, because the definition of residency is somewhat ill-defined, and I think both parties, or those who have used that model, know it today, what they meant by residency, but in the case of this model here, you can see Baker goes right up in that bulge there at the bottom on the left-hand side. If you take Gleno Road, which is right in that bulge, Gleno Road is equidistant from Heath and Baker. I'll just give you one example of why I think there's a distortion there. And so if you have Gleno Road equidistant, if you assign it residency by school district, which is what is done here, then that individual, that student on Gleno Road goes to Baker. Whereas that student would easily, and probably does, go to Heath today because it's actually in the buffer zone. And so because it's equidistant, you could argue, well, it could go either way. And so therefore, if you add all those up, I'm feeling that there is a significant potential difference on the Baker numbers, that 1007 is over. And in fact, if you look at the Heath prediction, is for FY22 is 459, which is down from today's 560. So there is there's undercapacity at Heath in this proposal and overcapacity at Baker, which is solved by building a new school, perhaps, or whatever, improving Baker. So my concern is that we have a methodology that we can all buy into, and my memo. Basically to the joint chairs, is that my recommendation was that perhaps Joe Connolly could be asked to put a small working group together, which some of us have already met with Joe, with Ben and Wendy Murphy, Dave Gayshok, and myself on this about 3 weeks ago, to talk about this a little bit, and I think that we need to hopefully have a meeting of the minds and come up with maybe this algorithm here, this methodology needs some adjustment. I don't know, but it's important, I think, to get right because we need to put the school capacity where the students are, and I think we can all buy into that. And the question is, how do you do that? It's a complex task, potentially. A lot of work has been done. I think it needs a review and a careful review of the assumptions, the methodology, and the data going in, so that we have a good sense of where that is. And in my memo, I gave the three options which show different results, and that to me is unsatisfactory. And I think we should have a much closer grouping of the project.
I think, what has been described as walkability is one of many dimensions. And if we had a blank slate and we had lots of land in which to put a school and the costs were comparable, I might buy in to doing a very detailed distribution analysis. But having been involved in the redistricting exercise, I guess 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we set the districts, it's a very complex undertaking, and the one thing I'm a little worried about is if we go through an exercise like you're describing, and a street or a neighborhood comes out in that analysis as Heath, just make a school up, or the new school, make another school up, and then in the end, when the real analysis is done, it's not Heath, it's some other school, because there's just so much that goes into it, and things change over time, that I don't know how much value that would lend to get to a very fine level of detail on that, but.
With due respect, I don't think it's a fine level of detail. I mean, essentially, if you've got two-thirds, the gut says two-thirds of the capacity is required in the north, a third is required in the south. Now we have a situation where it may be 50-50 on this chart, it may be even less than that, it's hard to tell. I think that's important and the material, and I think that it's not a fine detail. I don't think we're doing redistricting a la school policy, which is a very involved process, I understand that. I'm talking about estimating where capacity needs to go based upon overcrowding, which we have data based upon the cafeteria studies, for example, that tells us where the overcrowding is, and so we can see where the relief is, and it's basically in that in the Pierce Driscoll arena, and Baker clearly has got some overcrowding, but not to the extent of 50 or 80% of the capacity. It's more like 20 to 30% of the capacity. That's just a sense of judgment that I have. So if we're making decisions on where we're building schools, whether we're expanding them, where we're building them, I think that it is rather important to put that capacity in the right place. So, for example, it may well be that the solution is split between the north and the south when we come to it, in terms of we need to upgrade Pierce and Driscoll perhaps, and we need to either build a small school down to correspond to Baker, or maybe we expand Baker as the plans have suggested.
So the three projects you've just described probably adds up to $500 or $600 million.
My estimates are about 330, 40 billion. Million, not billion, excuse me. But as Mr. Dillon-Jones pointed out, there is a question of we've got to do renovation of Driscoll and Pierce over the next 5. I think if you ask the parents there, they want it next month. I mean, not next 10 years. And so I think we've got to factor that into account.
A reality check on how long it takes to do projects with MSBA, which is how we've done all of our major projects until the high school project and the plans for the ninth school. A couple of dates I put in the column that was published in the tab last month. We started applying for partnership to MSBA on the Devotion project in 2006. We applied 5 times. We were invited into eligibility in 2011, and the process started, and we're opening in 2018. And that was diligent work the whole way. So even if our current application for Pierce hits on the first try and gets invited into eligibility in December or January of 2019, and we just work through the process for the tens of millions of dollars that the state would contribute, it still takes a while. And what we also know is that they only want to do one project at a time with us. So in terms of the cost and the sequencing and when the taxpayers have to take on the burden, I think that's part of the whole analysis that would be helpful to look at.
I just want to add something in response to John's questions around where students are projected to live. First of all, just to be clear about the numbers here, on the northern schools, the addition, the increase is 223 students. On the south, it's 120 students. So this is a more revised and refined version than was seen earlier. So it's just talking about students, you're not talking about sections or classrooms, importantly. I do agree with you entirely in terms of it makes sense to agree on a methodology. It will make no sense to be, disputing methodologies of where students will be or won't be and how to then cite a school, through the end of this. So I would welcome that. But I just want to be clear about the numbers here and what they show.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the attempt here was to have a simple and transparent way of talking about where the children actually are. Because right now, with our very large buffer zones, the children are assigned to schools based on the space in the buildings, not where they live. But ultimately, if we're building one or more projects, we want to really be looking at, over the long run, where the children actually live, so that we can build the capacity near, to the extent that we can do that, their homes. And while we don't know where unborn children will live, the best predictors where children live today. So this is simply saying in the existing school zones, in each existing school zone, how many enrolled children live there today and are, based on our projection, will live there in 2022, and then all of the numbers are adjusted upward proportionally to the size of the number of children in that district for the non-resident programs.
Ms. Trolopsky.
I just wanted to give you a compliment on this diagram, because I really like the idea of thinking about north, central, and south. It really makes sense that way. I think when we start to divide it north and south, it doesn't make sense. And so this is really a very, very good way to think about it. And for me, what it says is you want to build something in the central area that you can have everybody be able to access from all sides, rather than trying to build all the ways in the north or all the ways in the south, when you're going to have busing for those kids to move to the other schools. I mean, wherever you do it, there's going to be busing. I don't think that we will be able to manage without busing. There are parents who drive today, and they will drive tomorrow and the next day. So, yes, we want to try and avoid it, but I think there's some certain facts that we have to live with.
Mr. Sandman. And then I'm going to bring it into Mr. Pollack and try to start bringing it to a close.
Ms. Charlotte has just done what I was going to do, which is to touch the third rail of Brookline school decisions and say that we can't build a school based on walkability. And where the kids live is not the point, it's where can we put the classrooms. That is the first consideration.
These materials were delivered to the committees just, a few hours ago, and we had a chance to look at them a little bit in advance. And I really appreciate the work that HMFH has done. And Ben, I'm praising you. You worked really, you've done an incredible job stepping in for Joe and getting all this organized. And I thought you guys did a really great presentation, managing so much information in a way that I was able to follow all the way through. I hope other people were too. As I read through all of this complexity and all of the criteria on the big evaluation sheets, and these will be available to the public as well, there's a multi-page document for each option as a sort of a score sheet and everything. My head, this was about 5 o'clock this afternoon, at my desk, my head started to sort of throb, and I thought, what do we really need to make, what do I want to make my decision based on? And I just tried to type up what are my key considerations in as simple terms as possible. And so I just typed something up briefly. It's not particularly well crafted, but I think that the 6 items that I identified as sort of general concerns or considerations make sense to me, and I passed it around to the boards. and these aren't in rank order, they're just in the order that I sort of delivered them to myself. The first is just the facility, the quality of the school itself, and that's not just the building, it's also the site. So it's the ability to deliver the program, the playground and play areas. They got short-stopped on this side, yeah. Okay, thank you. And then the quality of the building, the access to natural light, connection to the outdoors. These are values. How good is, just what can we build wherever we build? What's the quality of what we can build? We know we're going to build excellence, whatever we do, but sort of what in any given opportunity, what is the extent of that opportunity? And that would take up also this concern about how much play space there is per child and whether it's dramatically dropping because of an expansion without getting more playground in an existing facility. What do we get at the end in terms of the facility? That's the first criteria. The second one is the location. And this would pick up walkability, it would pick up safety, access, getting kids across the street, traffic, congestion, convenience, nearby other things that you would want, other recreation facilities adjacent, or sort of how good is the place, not the school and the playground, but where is it in town? That's the second criteria. The third I called deliverability. I mean, the first word I used, my spell checker didn't think was a real word. But, so, and deliverability is, I mean, are we going to be able to execute, right? Are we going to I don't want to spend any more time chasing our tail. I want to do something that we can actually get kids in a reasonable time frame. And there's a deliverability challenge for every option, and that's called the override, because the voters have to decide. We don't have any money for the night school. It's all coming from override. So there's risk there, and we've got to get an override, and we've got to get a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So those risks exist for all options, but then there are other risks that we have to analyze specifically option by option. Whatever it is, if we want it, that's great, but can we deliver it, and how much do we have to take that into consideration? The fourth is cost, and it includes all the different costs that have been outlined, and they need to be sort of totaled up. And if we're talking about a multi-site solution, then we need to package it and figure out, sort of apples to apples, 2 sites, 3 sites, 1 site, how much money are we in for? The last two are the degree to which it solves the expansion need. Building the capacity we need, not just classrooms, but all of the gyms and cafeterias and everything. And the degree, the last one is the degree to which it solves the renovation need for Pierce, for Driscoll. And then, what I wrote down here is we opened Lincoln almost 25 years ago, right? Like, this is a cycle. The school committee would like to be able to, on a regular basis, renovate our buildings about every 30 years and just go right around the town. And we haven't, with the expansion, we're way off of that because we have to spend the money on building new schools, and there's only so much CIP money to be had. But nonetheless, whether it's 25 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, as we get to building by building, they wear out and they depreciate, and we have to continue that. So if somebody else has other ideas, but to me, it's sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How does it sit with these things, and how much, are there any that really fall off the rails, that we're not getting anything at all? Because I really do think that it's kind of, there aren't endless options. It's difficult. We know every site is difficult. We know every site is going to have people that don't like it and are going to oppose it. There may be lawsuits at every site. There could be legal opposition. This is all the realities. So we need to sort of put some packages together and move forward.
So I'm going to end on a note. There are 3 sites that just hit me, and this is I'm going to end, and I'm probably going to drop a bomb, but I'll drop the bomb. There are three sites that hit me as completely off the rails, and we shouldn't be wasting any more time on it, but I'm not going to ask for a vote. I'm just going to give my view, which we can then ruminate on and then take a vote at a later meeting. But I would suggest to you the three options that we saw here that just we shouldn't spend any more time on are Baldwin North, and that's because of the traffic concern that was pointed out. A five-story building, a school building, is less than desirable, but New York City does it. Why not Brookline? But that's not the reason I'm suggesting we take it off. Traffic is Pierce 5 and then Baker 5. Both of those are very high costs with very low return. And it's just not even worth even thinking about. So I'm not asking for a vote, but I think it's just so obvious we should not waste our time. So,
Neil, can I just make one?
yeah,
You mentioned earlier about coming forward with options or piecing together different options into a package, for lack of a better word. I would urge the committee members to do that. I would also urge the public to do that. You see the upcoming meetings here. June 6th is the public hearing. I think it would be helpful, both the school staff as we continue the work, but also the folks who are making the decision, to hear ideas for what options work for people, or what combination of options work for people, and not simply just what won't work. This is, as we all know, an incredibly complex decision. If it was so easy, we wouldn't have been doing it for almost 10 years now. But to be able to get ideas, I think that we can come up with some, of course, but it's going to take the collective wisdom of everyone involved to come up with the best possible solutions. So I'd urge folks to come forward and suggest on the 6th packages or pieces or combinations that you think will work.
Mr. Levitan.
Can I just get can you qualify your statement? Is it Baker K5 that you want to take out, or Baker?
No, Baker 5.
And Pierce option 5?
Pierce 5.
Option 1 and 2?
They're both, it's Pierce 5, option 1 and 2, are they?
Yeah, 5, 1 and 2 are both.
Yeah, okay.
So just as you look through that, just realize that on both Pierce 5 option 1, there isn't much of a range. Pierce 5 option 2, there is quite a bit of range. So just so there's a nuance within those that you should make sure to look.
I mean, I do think that there's a fundamental difference between. There may not be a difference in terms of solving the expansion challenge between Baker 5 and Pierce 5. But when we say that the next renovation project that we're committed to is Pierce, and then if you pencil in what the baseline renovation cost at Pierce is, which might in fact be spending money and reducing enrollment capacity because it's overcrowded, then the incremental cost per classroom on the Pierce projects, when it includes renovation that we are committed to, others have said this, is different than Baker. So I'm not sure, if you're just trying to solve the classrooms, and particularly do it right away, then you have a point because it's so expensive. But in my mind, for instance, a Pierce 5 would be something that I would be very interested in looking at, a Pierce 3, a Pierce 4, a Pierce 5 in an MSBA partnership project, as we were right-sizing the building and the capacity and looking at what kind of pressure there is in the neighborhood for enrollment there and all of that.
So that was my opinion, which no one has to agree with. Okay, so I think we've been at this for 2 hours. My brain has kind of absorbed as much as I think it can. So I thank you all, and we'll see you all on the 6th.
Yeah, sure. Nope. So here's the upcoming schedule. June 6th, the public hearing. June 13th is a scheduled meeting of this group again, the Select Board, School Committee, and the Ad Hoc Advisory Committee group. And then June 20th is a tentative date if necessary. Some of the locations are TBD. Thanks, Jonathan.